In the heart of Africa, a battle rages, a battle for true independence, free from the shadows of colonialism that have lingered for far too long.
How do we reposition Africa as an equal partner in the geopolitics of this world?
Amid the calls for decolonization, a remarkable voice has risen from Europe, demanding justice for Africa.
Vive senza elettricità! Non ci venire a fare lezioni, Macron!
Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, with unwavering passion, has become a beacon of hope, advocating for the freedom of African nations from Western exploitation.
This is called the CFA franc. It is the colonial currency that France prints for 14 African nations. This is a child who works in a gold mine in Burkina Faso. Burkina Faso is one of the poorest nations in the world. Despite having gold, France prints colonial money for Burkina Faso, and in exchange, demands that 50% of everything Burkina Faso exports ends up in the French treasury coffers. What this child crawls into a tunnel to extract ends up mostly in the coffers of the French state. So, the solution is not to take Africans and move them to Europe. The solution is to free Africa from certain Europeans who exploit it and allow these people to live off what they have.
In Burkina Faso, one of the world's poorest countries, the harsh reality of this exploitation is laid bare.
Emmanuel Macron has called us disgusting. And here, the Italian press says, since Macron said that we are irresponsible shame. The responsible ones, Manuela Macron, are those who bombed Libya because they were annoyed that Italy had a privileged relationship in the energy field with Gaddafi, exposing us to the migration chaos in which we find ourselves.
Sono I francesi che mandano la gendarmerie a rispedire indietro qualunque immigrato tenti di passare il confine a Ventimiglia.
Disgusting are those like France who continue to exploit Africa by printing money for 14 African nations on which they apply seigneurage. Making children work in the mines extracting raw materials.
A sfruttare l'Africa, stampando moneta per 14 nazioni africane sulle quali applica il signoraggio, facendo lavorare bambini nelle miniere, estraendo materie prime come accade in Niger, dove la Francia estrae il 30% dell'uranio che gli serve a far camminare le centrali nucleari e il 90% dei nigeriani vive senza elettricità. Non ci venire a fare lezioni, Macron, perché l'Africa scappa
Don't come to
da
give us
voi.
lessons,
E la
Macron, because
soluzione
Africa is
non
running
è
away from
spostare
you.
gli africani
And
in
the
Europa
solution is
e
not to move
liberare
the Africans
l'Africa
to
da
Europe,
certi
but to free
europei.
Africa from certain
Non
Europeans.
accettiamo lezioni. Chiaro?
Children, small enough to crawl into the narrow tunnels of gold mines, labor in the dark, their hands gathering the precious metal that will never benefit their homeland. Instead, half of everything they extract ends up in the coffers of the French treasury, a cruel reminder of the CFA France's stranglehold on their country.
In my speech at Atreju is a demonstration that takes place in the month of September. It ended up on the websites of a series of Pan-Africanist associations. Let's say they are African patriots who fight against the CFA franc. In my speech, I mentioned the problem of Macron's France and the CFA franc. There is another interview of mine on at least 2 television programs. We went 20 miles to do a demonstration when Macron brought back the CFA franc. For which, I mean, there is a historian who speaks, if Macron will call her to go to Paris first to me, and then to Macron. Now, these CFA francs, I have them here with me. I have also studied a little. They are used by 14 African countries that I am going to read: Cameroon, Central African Republic, Congo, Gabon, Chad, Benin, Burkina Faso, Ivory Coast, Guinea-Bissau, Mali, Niger, Senegal, and Togo. Perfect. I say these countries send few migrants because we have done some calculations. The bulk of migrants in Italy come from Tunisia, Eritrea, Iraq, and Nigeria. The Ivory Coast is the only one that sends us a total of 1,064 migrants out of 23,370, but it is 8th on the list of countries. So are we really sure that the point is this, or is it instead a way to identify an enemy who is then a very good enemy for the sovereigntists because Macron is really the anti-province par excellence? Perfect. I say these countries send few migrants because we have done some calculations. The bulk of migrants in Italy come from Tunisia, Eritrea, Iraq, and Nigeria. The Ivory Coast is the only one that sends us a total of 1,064 migrants out of 23,370, but it is 8th on the list of countries. So, first point, when I brought up the CFA franc, I did it in response to the fact that Macron had called us disgusting because we were making policies to control our migratory flows. So maybe it is worth reminding this nice gentleman that before giving such lapidary judgments towards his European partners, he should remember how France behaves towards these people. You can't tell others that they are not welcoming enough when you print money for 14 nations and apply senior age. Because what Maritain didn't explain to her before, when he told us that it is only a system of exchanges, is that this left, which is there defending neo-colonialism, is a reminder of what the Italian left is today. Because I shudder in front of the articles in Repubblica. Today, Merlo in Repubblica calls me the Queen of Catona because I allowed myself to explain that in Africa there's still a neo-colonial problem. Because what does Merlo care? That in his Roman, Italian, and Parisian living rooms, this problem doesn't exist. I'll go and explain it to the associations of Africans who flee, who denounce, and who burn the CFA franc in the square for what it produces. France is a benefactor in Africa, Maritain told us. Let me put it this way. In exchange for this exchange system, France demands that these nations pay into the coffers of the French treasury the equivalent of 50% of their exports. In Burkina Faso, I found out that $1 billion is more or less equal to 10 billion. In Burkina Faso, excuse me, where are the children? I showed the other evening a photo of a child. I will show it to you too. This is a child who works in a gold mine in Burkina Faso. They use children to work in these gold mines because they can get into the tunnels better, okay? 50% of the gold that this child enters a tunnel to extract ends up in the French treasury. Now, does that seem like a normal thing to you? And look, don't come and tell me, and I'll tell you two other very quick things. But no one from these nations. But what does that mean? It's obvious that if a Nigerian escapes from Nigeria, if he had a rich Senegal next to him, maybe he wouldn't come to Italy. GFAT asked off the air about the 10 billion because I had read this thing. He answered me that the 10 billion are not things that could be used by Africans to invest in roads, bridges, infrastructures, but they are the reserves that every country must have. So France tells them, you have these reserves, I'll keep them for you to maintain a stable currency so that it does not fluctuate continuously, and for your economy, it is a great good. Give me a break. Let's do it like this. Okay, then I'll tell Maritain that we do it like this. Since the French are benefactors with their CFA francs, let's say that now we do it with the European Central Bank, what France does. Let's see if France is in agreement.
Nel 2015 il Dipartimento di Stato americano pubblica 3.000 mail, se ricorda, che erano indirizzate all'allora segretario di Stato americano Hillary Clinton.
Mirta, there is another thing I would like to discuss with you today, which I find very interesting. What does the CFA franc have to do with the migration issue? And is France a benefactor or merely interested in the CFA franc? Because they are telling us that France does not gain anything from it.
Africana che si basava sulla moneta libica. Secondo quello che scrivono in questa mail,
The solution to Africa's plight is not migration, it is liberation. It is about freeing Africa from the grip of those who have exploited it for centuries, allowing its people to finally thrive on their own terms. The words of Melanie resonate powerfully across continents as she confronts those who would keep Africa in chains, reminding the world that the true path to justice lies in Africa's freedom.